The frigid, crystalline waters of Flathead Lake in Montana had preserved their secret for 69 years. On a luminous September morning in 2024, a team of recreational divers explored the deep waters near Wild Horse Island, utilizing advanced side-scan sonar to map the lake bottom as part of an environmental survey project. What materialized on their screens at approximately 10:15 in the morning would finally answer a question that had haunted a family and puzzled investigators since October 1955. 6 meters below the surface, resting on a shelf of rock that jutted out from the underwater terrain, sat a 1955 Cadillac Eldorado in what had once been a brilliant shade of cherry red. The chrome trim, though dulled by decades underwater, was still recognizable. The distinctive tail fins that had made the 1955 Eldorado an icon of American automotive design were clearly visible through the murky water. And when divers descended to investigate, they discovered something that would transform this remarkable find into one of Montana's most significant cold case breakthroughs. Inside the submerged vehicle, forensic investigators would discover human remains that had been preserved by the cold lake water and protected from scavengers by the vehicle's sealed interior. The discovery would finally provide answers about what happened to a 32-year-old insurance salesman who had driven away on a Saturday afternoon in October 1955 and simply vanished, along with his prized Cadillac, into the vast Montana wilderness. Before we reveal what investigators found in that submerged car and the theories about how it ended up at the bottom of Flathead Lake, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell. Today's story spans nearly 7 decades of mystery, a family's desperate search for closure, and the limitations of forensic science when time has erased most of the evidence. This is the story of David Miller and the discovery that would bring him home after 69 years beneath Montana's largest natural freshwater lake. In the autumn of 1955, David Michael Miller was 32 years old and living the American dream in Missoula, Montana. Standing 6 feet tall with sandy blonde hair that he kept neatly combed in the style popularized by movie stars of the era, David had bright blue eyes, a warm smile, and the kind of natural charisma that made him exceptionally successful in his chosen profession as an insurance salesman. His colleagues at Northwestern Mutual Insurance often joked that David could sell ice to Eskimos, but the truth was simpler. People trusted him because he genuinely cared about protecting their families and futures. David had grown up in Missoula, the son of a logging company foreman and a schoolteacher. He had served in the United States Navy during the final years of World War II, stationed on a destroyer in the Pacific, though he rarely spoke about his service except to say that it had taught him the value of planning for the unexpected. After returning home in 1946, he had used his GI Bill benefits to attend the University of Montana, where he studied business and met the love of his life, Linda Thompson, a nursing student from Kalispell. David and Linda married in June 1948 in a simple ceremony at the First Presbyterian Church in Missoula. By 1955, they had 2 sons, Christopher, who was 5 years old and already showing signs of his father's outgoing personality, and Matthew, who had just turned 3 and was the more serious and contemplative of the 2 boys. The family lived in a modest but well-maintained 2-bedroom house on Higgins Avenue, just a 10-minute walk from downtown Missoula and close enough to the Clark Fork River for the boys to go fishing with their father on summer evenings. What set David apart from other young men trying to establish themselves in post-war Montana was his determination to give his family more than just security. He wanted to give them style and a sense of possibility. In March 1955, after 2 years of careful saving and planning, David had purchased his dream car, a brand new 1955 Cadillac Eldorado in a stunning shade of Matador red. The car cost nearly $4,000, more than many people earned in a year, but David had negotiated hard, made a substantial down payment from his sales commissions, and secured financing for the rest. The Eldorado wasn't just transportation to David, it was a statement about how far he had come from his working-class roots, a mobile office that impressed potential clients, and a symbol of American prosperity in the optimistic mid-1950s. The Eldorado featured white leather interior, power windows and seats, air conditioning, which was a luxury in Montana, and those magnificent tail fins that made it instantly recognizable anywhere it went. David named it Ruby and treated the vehicle with reverence, washing and waxing it every Saturday morning without fail. David's personality was perfectly suited for sales work. He was genuinely interested in people's stories, had an excellent memory for names and details about clients' families, and possessed an optimistic outlook that was infectious. His sales territory covered western Montana, which meant he spent several days a month traveling to small towns throughout the region, meeting with farmers, ranchers, small business owners, and young families who were building their futures in Big Sky country. Despite the travel demands of his job, David was a devoted family man. He coached Christopher's Little League baseball team, never missed Sunday dinner with his extended family, and had a weekly date night with Linda where they would drive to a local restaurant or, on special occasions, to a movie at the Wilma Theater. Linda later told investigators that her husband had been talking about cutting back on his travel once Matthew started kindergarten, perhaps taking a position in the Missoula office that would allow him to be home every night. David's routine was predictable and organized. He kept meticulous records of his appointments, mileage, and expenses in a leather-bound planner that he carried everywhere. He always called Linda before leaving for overnight trips and again upon arriving at his destination. He was punctual to a fault, never late for appointments, and prided himself on his reliability. His friends and colleagues described him as steady, trustworthy, and completely
devoted to his wife and children. In October 1955, David was having his best year yet at Northwestern Mutual. He was on track to exceed his sales quota by 30%, which would earn him a substantial bonus that he and Linda had already earmarked for a down payment on a larger house with a proper yard where the boys could play. He had recently been promoted to senior sales representative, and there was talk of him eventually taking over as regional manager when the current manager retired in a few years. David had no known enemies, no financial troubles beyond the manageable car payment, no marital problems, and no health issues. His Navy medical records showed he had recovered completely from a minor injury sustained during his service, and his most recent physical examination in August 1955 had declared him in excellent health. He didn't gamble, rarely drank beyond an occasional beer with colleagues, and was known throughout Missoula as a solid, dependable family man. On Saturday, October 15, 1955, David Miller had every reason to look forward to the future. He had a loving wife, 2 healthy sons, a beautiful home, a successful career, and that magnificent Cadillac Eldorado that turned heads wherever he drove. He was scheduled for what should have been a routine overnight business trip to Kalispell, with plans to return home by Sunday afternoon in time for dinner with his family. But within 24 hours, David Miller would vanish completely. His cherry-red Cadillac Eldorado would disappear with him, and a family's perfect life would shatter in ways that would echo through the next 7 decades. Saturday, October 15, 1955, dawned cold and overcast in Missoula, Montana, with temperatures hovering around 42 degrees and a light drizzle that had begun during the night. David Miller rose at his usual 6:30 in the morning, careful not to wake Linda as he dressed quietly in the bedroom of their Higgins Avenue home. He had packed his overnight bag the night before, a small leather suitcase containing a fresh shirt, his toiletries, an extra tie, and the client files he would need for his meetings in Kalispell. Linda woke as David was tying his shoes and came downstairs to make him breakfast. Over eggs and toast at 7:15 in the morning, they reviewed the plans for the weekend. David would drive to Kalispell, approximately 120 miles north of Missoula, where he had 3 appointments scheduled for Saturday afternoon and evening. He planned to spend Saturday night at the Kalispell Grand Hotel, a modest establishment that Northwestern Mutual had approved for employee travel, and would attend Sunday morning services at the Presbyterian Church there before making the drive home, arriving by 3 in the afternoon in time for Sunday dinner. Christopher and Matthew were still asleep when David kissed Linda goodbye at 7:45 in the morning. She walked him to the driveway where the cherry-red Cadillac Eldorado gleamed despite the overcast morning, freshly washed as always. David had filled the tank the previous evening and checked the oil, tire pressure, and fluid levels. His naval training had instilled in him a dedication to proper vehicle maintenance that bordered on obsessive. "Drive carefully," Linda remembered saying, a phrase she uttered every time her husband left on a business trip. "The roads might be slick with this rain." "I always do," David had replied with his characteristic smile. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel tonight." David backed the Cadillac out of the driveway at exactly 7:52 in the morning, waving to Linda as he headed north on Higgins Avenue toward Highway 93, the main route that would take him through the Flathead Valley to Kalispell. The drive typically took about 2.5 hours in good weather, though the rain and low clouds might add another 30 minutes to the journey. Several people in Missoula saw David that morning. Gas station attendant Robert Williams remembered seeing the distinctive red Cadillac pass by around 8:05 in the morning, heading north out of town. Martha Henderson, who ran the small grocery store on the northern edge of Missoula, waved to David as he drove past at approximately 8:15 in the morning. She recognized both the car and David, who was a regular customer and had sold her husband life insurance the previous year. The route from Missoula to Kalispell followed Highway 93 north through some of Montana's most spectacular scenery. The road wound through valleys and mountain passes, skirting the western edge of the Mission Mountains and passing within a few miles of Flathead Lake, the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. In October, the aspens would have been turning gold, and the first snows would have been visible on the higher peaks. David's first scheduled appointment in Kalispell was at 2 in the afternoon with a rancher named Thomas Clark, who was interested in increasing his life insurance coverage. The location was Clark's ranch office, about 15 miles south of Kalispell proper. David never arrived for that appointment, and Thomas Clark, after waiting until 2:30 in the afternoon, assumed that the insurance salesman had been delayed by weather or had rescheduled without proper notice. The last confirmed sighting of David Miller came at approximately 11:20 in the morning at a small gas station and general store in Polson, Montana, a town situated on the south shore of Flathead Lake, roughly halfway between Missoula and Kalispell. According to Patterson's statement, David had seemed perfectly normal, friendly, polite, and in good spirits. He had commented on the weather, saying he hoped the rain would clear up before evening, and had mentioned that he was on his way to Kalispell for business appointments. Patterson noted that David had checked his watch several times, clearly conscious of staying on schedule, and had left the gas station heading north on Highway 93 at approximately 11:35 in the morning. From Polson to Kalispell was about 40 miles, a drive that should have taken roughly 50 minutes even with the rain. David should have arrived in Kalispell by 1:30 in the afternoon, giving him plenty of time to check into his hotel, review his client files, and make the short drive south to the Clark Ranch for his 2 in the afternoon appointment. But David Miller never checked in to the Kalispell Grand Hotel. He never made his 2 in the afternoon appointment with Thomas Clark, nor his 4:30 in the afternoon appointment with another potential client, nor his 7 p.m. in the evening meeting with a small business owner who wanted to discuss a pension plan. The hotel held his reservation until midnight Saturday before releasing the room. None of his scheduled clients heard from him or received any explanation for the missed appointments. When David hadn't called the house by 9 p.m. Saturday, Linda Miller began to worry. Her husband was nothing but reliable, and he never failed to call when he said he would. She told herself that perhaps he had been so busy with successful sales calls that he had lost track of time, or that the hotel's phone lines were temporarily out of service. By 11 p.m. the evening, Linda's worry had intensified into genuine concern. She called the Kalispell Grand Hotel and was told that a Mr. David Miller had a reservation but had never checked in. She then called her father-in-law who lived nearby, and together they called the Lake County Sheriff's Department to report that David was overdue and had missed his scheduled check-in call. The deputy who took the call suggested that David might have been delayed by the weather, perhaps had car trouble, or had decided to stay with friends along the route. With no evidence of foul play and less than 12 hours since David should have arrived in Kalispell, there wasn't much the sheriff's department could do except make a note of the call and suggest that Linda wait until morning. Linda Miller spent a sleepless night repeatedly calling the Kalispell Hotel and checking with the hospital and police departments in towns along Highway 93. By Sunday morning, when David still hadn't called and hadn't returned home as planned, she knew with absolute certainty that something terrible had happened to her husband. When David Miller failed to return home by Monday morning, Linda contacted Northwestern Mutual Insurance and David's supervisor, Richard Foster, who immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong. David Miller was one of the company's most reliable salesmen. In 5 years of employment, he had never missed an appointment without notice or failed to follow up on scheduled calls. By Monday, October 17, 1955, the Lake County Sheriff's Department had initiated a formal missing persons investigation. Sheriff William Hayes assigned Deputy John Anderson to lead the case, and search efforts began immediately along Highway 93 between Missoula and Kalispell. The search focused initially on the most likely scenario, that David's Cadillac had been involved in an accident somewhere along the 120-mile route. Deputies checked every pullout, scenic overlook, and side road where a vehicle might have gone off the road or been forced off by another driver. The investigation was complicated by the geography. Highway 93 wound through mountainous terrain with steep drop-offs, dense forests, and numerous locations where a car could have left the road and ended up hidden from view. Search teams paid particular attention to the section of highway between Polson and Kalispell, since that was where David had last been seen alive. The road along Flathead Lake was especially scrutinized, with officers checking the shoreline and interviewing residents who lived in houses overlooking the lake. The distinctive cherry-red Cadillac Eldorado was too noticeable to simply vanish. If it had gone off the road or ended up in the lake near a populated area, surely someone would have noticed. The Montana Highway Patrol joined the search on Tuesday, bringing additional manpower and resources. They interviewed every gas station attendant, restaurant owner, and business operator along Highway 93, showing a photograph of David Miller and asking if anyone had seen him or his distinctive Cadillac after the Polson gas station sighting at 11:20 in the morning on Saturday. No one had. It was as if David Miller and his red Cadillac Eldorado had simply driven into a void somewhere between Polson and Kalispell on that rainy October morning. The investigation expanded to consider alternative theories. Had David been the victim of a crime? Robbery seemed unlikely. He rarely carried large amounts of cash, and his wallet typically contained less than $50. Could he have been carjacked? The Cadillac was certainly valuable enough to attract attention, but why would a carjacker drive the vehicle somewhere along a well-traveled highway rather than heading for Canada or a major city?
The family. The life insurance policy that David had maintained through Northwestern Mutual provided some financial stability, but it took 7 years before David could be declared legally dead, allowing Linda to finally collect the benefits. Even then, she told friends that accepting the money felt like giving up hope, though she knew her husband would have wanted her to use it to care for their sons. The boys grew up with only fragmentary memories of their father. Christopher, who had been 5 when David disappeared, retained vague recollections of fishing trips and being tossed in the air by strong arms. Matthew, only 3 at the time, had no real memories of his father at all, knowing him only through photographs and the stories his mother and older brother shared. Both boys learned early not to ask too many questions about their father's disappearance, recognizing how the topic caused their mother visible pain. Linda kept David's belongings exactly as he had left them for nearly a decade. His suits hung in the closet, his shaving kit remained in the bathroom, and his leather-bound appointment planner, recovered from his office after his disappearance, sat on the nightstand beside what had been his side of the bed. Only when Christopher was preparing to leave for college in 1968 did Linda finally pack away David's possessions, though she could never bring herself to dispose of them entirely. The case generated periodic renewed interest over the decades. In 1965, a construction crew building a new highway section discovered what they thought might be a vehicle at the bottom of a ravine near the Mission Mountains.
The Lake County Sheriff's Department spent 2 days excavating the site, only to discover it was a 1940s farm truck that had been abandoned there long before David's disappearance. In 1978, a hunter exploring remote wilderness areas east of Flathead Lake reported seeing what appeared to be chrome bumper reflecting sunlight deep in a forested canyon. Search and rescue teams investigated but found nothing. The hunter's account was eventually dismissed as a trick of light on exposed rock formations. As technology advanced, the case took on new dimensions. In 1983, when Montana began computerizing old case files, David Miller's disappearance was entered into state and federal databases. The distinctive details of the 1955 Cadillac Eldorado were flagged in classic car registries, and investigators hoped that if the vehicle had been sold or restored, someone might eventually trace it back to its original owner. But the car never surfaced. No VIN number matches appeared in any database. No parts from a cherry red 1955 Eldorado showed up at salvage yards or restoration shops. The vehicle had vanished as completely as its owner. Flathead Lake itself underwent significant changes over the decades. In the 1960s and 1970s, increased recreational use led to more thorough mapping of the shoreline in shallow areas. Marinas were built, boat launches improved, and waterfront property developed. Scuba diving became popular with enthusiasts exploring the lake's clear waters and remarkable underwater visibility. Yet, despite hundreds of dives over the years, no one reported finding a submerged vehicle. The lake's deeper areas remained largely unexplored until the 1990s, when advances in sonar technology made it possible to create detailed maps of the lake bottom. Several surveys were conducted for environmental and geological purposes, but these focused primarily on the lake's central basin, which reached depths of over 300 feet. The shelf areas at intermediate depths, particularly near islands and irregular shoreline formations, received less attention. Linda Miller died in 2007 at the age of 78, having spent 52 years not knowing what had happened to her husband. Christopher and Matthew were both present when she passed away at St. Patrick Hospital, the same facility where she had worked for 3 decades. In her final days, she spoke about David as if he might walk through the door at any moment, asking her sons to promise they would never stop looking for answers about their father's fate. Christopher Miller, who would become a civil engineer, died in 2018 at the age of 68. Matthew Miller, a high school history teacher, was 72 years old in 2024 and living in Billings, Montana. He had long since given up hope of discovering what happened to his father, though he had never forgotten the man he barely remembered. Matthew's children, David's grandchildren, had grown up hearing stories about their grandfather who had vanished in a red Cadillac, and the family legend had been passed down to yet another generation. By 2024, the David Miller case had become part of Montana folklore, occasionally featured in local history books and true crime websites dedicated to unsolved mysteries. The story of the insurance salesman who drove away in his prized Cadillac and was never seen again had achieved an almost mythical status in the Flathead region, with various theories proposed over the years, ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. Some believe David had been the victim of a crime, perhaps robbery or carjacking, and that his body and car had been hidden in one of Montana's countless remote locations. Others theorized he may have suffered a medical emergency while driving along Highway 93. Perhaps a heart attack, stroke, or other acute condition caused him to lose control of the vehicle, which then left the road and entered the lake. The location where the Cadillac was found, on a shelf approximately 50 yards from the current shoreline at a depth of 6 meters, is consistent with this theory. In 1955, before decades of development and shoreline changes, that area may have been closer to the road, possibly accessible through terrain that has since been altered. The car could have entered the water, floated briefly before filling and sinking, and settled on the shelf where changing water levels and sediment eventually concealed it from casual observation. Other theories persist. Some investigators suggest David might swerve to avoid an animal or another vehicle and accidentally driven into the lake. A few speculate about the possibility of foul play, though no evidence supports this, and the location seems inconsistent with a deliberate attempt to conceal a crime. The truth is that after 69 years, with no physical evidence and no witnesses, the explanation of David Miller's death will likely remain never known with complete certainty. The case file sat in the Lake County Sheriff's Archives, periodically reviewed but offering no new leads. Everyone who had been directly involved in the original investigation was deceased. The Cadillac Eldorado, once so distinctive and noticeable, had become a ghost car, existing only in old photographs and fading memories. The Montana Aquatic Research Foundation was established in 2020 by a group of environmental scientists, divers, and lake enthusiasts who wanted to create comprehensive underwater maps of Montana's major lakes. The foundation's work combined recreational diving with scientific data collection using advanced side-scan sonar and underwater photography to document aquatic ecosystems, geological formations, and, unfortunately, the growing problem of underwater debris and pollution. In September 2024, the foundation organized a month-long expedition to survey sections of Flathead Lake that had received limited attention in previous mapping projects. The team, led by marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen and technical dive coordinator Marcus Thompson, focused on the underwater shelves and drop-offs around Wild Horse Island, a state park located in the southern portion of the lake. On September 18, 2024, at approximately 10:15 in the morning, sonar operator Jennifer Martinez detected an anomaly on her screens. The side-scan sonar showed a large, regular object resting on a rock shelf at a depth of approximately 6 meters, roughly 20 feet below the surface. The object measured about 18 feet in length and appeared to have angular features that didn't match natural geological formations or typical underwater debris. "I've got something interesting here," Jennifer called out to Dr. Chen, who was reviewing data from the previous day's survey. "It's too regular to be natural, and it's in an odd location on a shelf that juts out from the underwater terrain near the island's western shore." Dr. Chen examined the sonar images and agreed that the object warranted investigation. Marcus Thompson assembled a dive team consisting of himself and 2 experienced foundation divers, Robert Kim and Lisa Anderson. The water temperature at 6 meters would be cold but manageable with proper exposure protection, and the visibility at that depth was typically excellent. The dive team entered the water at 11:30 in the morning, descending along the underwater cliff face until they reached the shelf where the sonar had detected the anomaly. What they found took their breath away, not from the cold water, but from the shock of recognition. Resting on the rock shelf, remarkably intact despite decades underwater, was an automobile. The vehicle sat upright as if it had somehow settled gently onto the shelf rather than crashing into the lake. The distinctive tail fins and long, low profile were immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with 1950s automotive design. And though the original cherry red paint had faded to a dull brownish red and was covered with a thin layer of algae and sediment, there was no mistaking what they had found. Marcus Thompson's underwater camera captured the scene in vivid detail. The chrome trim, though tarnished, was still present. The distinctive Eldorado script on the vehicle's side was visible once sediment was carefully brushed away. Most remarkably, the license plate was still attached to the rear bumper. The metal discolored, but the numbers and letters were still legible beneath the aquatic growth. Montana, 1955.